All right, we are back again to talk hockey on Prime Sports. Hockey East meets West. That means Jan Levine, big New York Rangers fan, joins me every week here to talk New York Rangers hockey and the NHL with yours truly, Vancouver Canucks fan. As the New York Rangers were off a 2-0 week after the All-Star break, and it always helps when you're playing the Detroit Red Wings.
That's a fairly mild understatement these days. Yes, Detroit is the dregs of the NHL, almost harkening back to the pre-Stevie Yzerman days. If people remember just how bad they were back then before they got Yzerman, and then clearly the Russian Five and everybody else they got and became a Cup contender and a Cup champion under Scotty Bowman. But
I'm
yeah,
not even
right
sure
now,
there might even be like young. How old? When was that? What was the last year they were really good?
a while ago, let's just say it's what, maybe 2000s. I mean, again, when
Oh,
I
so there are young teenagers who have never seen Detroit in their heyday.
probably. I mean, if you go back to those Detroit Colorado series, which were Donniebrooks and Wars, I
Yeah,
mean,
that's true.
those were the good, quote unquote good days, right? But now, Yzerman is back. You got to hope that they have a plan. I mean, the big thing that that heart actually touches on your team is was this debate at the time of Philip Zadina versus Quinn Hughes, right? And the Detroit had Hughes sitting there. Hughes was playing at Michigan, probably was the guy they should have taken. And not that Zadina is a bad pick, but seeing just of what Hughes has blossomed into and
Oh
what
yeah, baby.
blue line, you would think that if they had taken Hughes, just how much better of a team they might be. Granted, they need some help between the pipes because right now Howard and Bernier aren't getting the job done. But Hughes, as you well know, being a Canucks fan, has blossomed to be one of the better young defensemen in the NHL and a fairly strong contender to win the Calder this year.
Well, look, just look at Buffalo. I mean, they got Dahlin and Eichel, and they still stink. So they I
Getting
don't.
there,
Yeah,
getting there.
I
So
mean, do they stick with what they have?
who? Buffalo or
Buffalo
Detroit?
or
You mean?
Buffalo. I mean, what is it? This
I
is
mean,
what,
the
what
thing
about
is,
what about the
well, you have to
coach either? He's only in his first year, right?
I think they keep Kruger. I don't think they get rid of Kruger. I think you can see signs of growth there. Eichel's really taken another step forward this year. Dahlin hasn't had as good a year this year as he did last year. But you look at they have some decent guys in the pipeline. They think Linus Allmark could be their goalie of the future. If he is, then they have a set piece between the pipes. They've made moves that have not necessarily made sense. You look kind of almost look at that Ryan O'Reilly trade, which turned out to be a fairly bad deal for them in terms of what they gave up. But Buffalo, I still think is starting to build surrounding Eichel and clearly now Dahlin.
So you
You would hope
wouldn't
that's the
you wouldn't
case.
shake up the front office then?
I mean, Pagula has done that a lot already. I mean, they've done some shakeups, right? They brought Botterill in only a couple of years ago. I
Mm-hmm.
think you got to give him at least another year or two to kind of see what
Okay.
he can do. He brought in Ralph Kruger, who's had a lot of success overseas.
Okay.
Whether or not he has that kind of success here is up in the air. But you don't want to start making massive changes in your front office
Sure.
year after year or every 2 years because you get no continuity. So I think the plan for right now is hopefully stay the course to a certain extent, see what you got there. Try to build around those guys. If Allmark comes back in another couple of weeks, see if he is your goalie of the future. Granted, he didn't necessarily grab a hold of the job early this year. Hutton necessarily hasn't had a good run except for early last year, and then he slumped. Buffalo was the toast of the town for a while last year. They got off to a very good start, and then they had that massive slump. So clearly, there's work to be done. But I do think you kind of have to give Botterill maybe another year or so, and if you don't see progress, then you may start thinking of making a
What
change.
about Blashill? He's been there for this is his fifth year.
Blashill is going to start to get some taps on the window, right? Losing Anthony Mantha this year really hasn't helped them. Their goaltending is an abomination. I mean, that's really a big key. Howard is they thought he'd be the goalie. They gave up on Mrazek, and granted, as Mrazek is bolstered by a very good Carolina defense, he's turned out to maybe be a little bit closer to the guy you thought you had in Detroit than the guy you got rid of. But you look at Philip Hronik is a guy you kind of hope to build around. You have Mantha, you have Larkin. You have a couple of other pieces that are Tyler Bertuzzi is there. No, but you look, the thing that they did need, they granted Mark Sider this year. The thing you did need was a stud blue liner. Well, you had that stud blue liner. You decided to go for the forward, and right now that's looking like an incorrect decision, regardless of what Zadina pans out to be.
Speaking of coaches who have been around for now 6 years, what about Paul Maurice? He's only been to one conference final, and this has not been a good year so far for Winnipeg. They are still in contention, like 5 or 6 other teams, maybe 8 other teams. in the Western Conference for the Pacific and the wild card. But still, it hasn't been a good year for Winnipeg at this point.
No, I think you have to blame Maurice to a certain extent. They also have to take some tack at the front office. Granted, now Cheveldayoff has done some moves to improve this team. There was some news today that broke that Dustin Byfuglien and the Jets are headed towards a mutual termination of his contract,
Okay.
which will free up some cap space if they do want to make a move. But they gave up a first rounder last year, and though they got it back to the Rangers, right? They dealt him in the Kevin Hayes trade and then got it back as part of the Jacob Trouba trade. It is feasible they might be willing to give up another first rounder. They do need material help on the blue line, which is where if Byfuglien was playing, he would be able to fill that role, but he's not there and Trouba's not there. Pionk has played better than expected. Jack Roslovic up front has had a decent year. Blake Wheeler hasn't had the kind of year he normally has, but he's still a threat. Line A is really rebounded, but he's going to cost him a ton of money if he has another year like that next year when his 2-year bridge deal expires. You know what Mark Scheifele can do. Hellebuck has been phenomenal, but he's starting to sag under the weight of what the defense in front of him is providing. So I do think Maurice is going to get called on the carpet a little bit, but the Matthew Perreault deal really hasn't panned out very well. Brian Little's been hurt a lot. That deal is really hamstringing the Jets right now. But I do think they do potentially could utilize the savings that they get if they move away from Byfuglien and free up the cap space there to possibly add another body. And as you said, the West is so tightly contested that you get a little bit of an edge, and that may be sufficient enough to maybe make a run, because we know the amount of talent that Winnipeg has up front. Mm-hmm. If they could get a steady blue liner to go alongside what they have right now, or even one or two guys, because they're playing guys like Tucker Pullman, Niku just got called up. You hope he can pan out. But if they can get a solid blue liner or two, utilizing the cap space that they have and some of the tradable assets in terms of picks, they might be a team that could be dangerous, mainly because Hellebuck has done it before, and he has the experience of carrying them to a cup final.
And we talked about Detroit, and we mentioned them last week, going over the way that NBC and their cable partners, how they market the sport with the teams that they put on. And I couldn't believe it this week, because every week I record. I always record a week in advance all of my games. So this way I don't have to touch them. Just in case I miss for whatever reason, they're recorded, like if I forget. And so I do that in hockey too. Okay, what hockey games am I going to record? And I just couldn't believe it. Not once. Tonight, Flyers. Not twice. Thursday, Buffalo. But Sunday on NBC, they've got the Detroit Red Wings on 3 times this week on NBC and their cable partners. That to me, somebody should be fired.
It's hard to argue. I mean, the NHL makes you scratch your head at times in terms of how they market the sport. The guys who are doing it aren't doing a particularly great job of it. I can understand almost every once in a while having Detroit, because they love their quote-unquote rivalries, and you go back to the original 6 matchups, and maybe. I'm not sure how Detroit-Philly right now is compelling. I definitely don't know how Detroit-Buffalo is compelling right now, unless you're going to market Eichel versus Larkin. But I don't think anybody other than the true hockey fan is turning in to watch that game. So there are lots of other teams that are way more compelling to watch right now. They're a lot more interesting to watch. Unfortunately, NBC seems to fall back on the quote-unquote old standbys and put matchups that may have made sense 5 or 10 years ago that don't seem to make sense now. They need to do a much better job of marketing some of the young guys in the sport, some of the teams that are up and coming. We thought we'd see Vegas a little bit more. We really haven't seen that unless NBC Sports is running, a doubleheader, and then maybe you'll get them in the late game. But I don't think they've done a particularly good job of building the sports from a grassroots level, of getting teams involved. You have Nashville. You could be marketing. Dallas at least got the Winter Classic this year, so they're finally on. You'd probably like to see Winnipeg a lot more. Vancouver would be a team that's a lot of fun to probably watch right now. I'd even want, Florida, when Barkov is healthy, as a team you'd want to see. Columbus, because of the way Merzlikins is playing, and some of the guys there that are making up for the loss of Bobrovsky, and they moved up to 3rd in the Metro. You're going to see Toronto a lot because they're their original 6 team. You're going to see Boston a lot because they're an original 6 team. But they do need to do a much better job of marketing some of the teams that, almost you think about it, we talked about it before, where the NFL down the road, has the ability to flex games. You'd almost be willing that the NHL would kind of work into the next CBA or the next contract with the networks, the ability to flex, and then make a change a day or two in advance and try to find much better matchups than the kinds we're seeing right now.
Yeah, even if they have to do what I think I say baseball does it, which is if they have to do it in a 24-hour, 48-hour period, you just if you can't send your own crew out there, then just take one of the feeds from one of the teams.
Or take a second.
Nobody cares.
Take a secondary crew even, right? You can make decisions in advance. You look at last year, right? St. Louis didn't get on really, if you think about it, until playoff time. They were on that massive run, and you didn't have the ability to kind of see them. Even this year, you're not seeing them that much compared to what
ridiculous.
You might expect.
It's uncalled for.
And even though they're not as good as they were last year, they're still a pretty compelling watch and a pretty exciting team to watch.
Yeah, it's just I don't even know what. Look, even last week they should have shown the first Calgary-Edmonton matchup, and they didn't.
Absolutely.
So,
absolutely.
I mean, hockey fans in general, they're not stupid. I think there's this perception that, and I dealt with this when Vancouver played Boston in the finals. And now times have changed a little bit, but you know what? I'm not so sure they've changed much at all at that network. Because back when Vancouver played Boston in the finals, it was almost like it was a war against the U.S. and Canada. And you had to be on the side of Boston because they were representing the United States. This is ridiculous. That's not the way fans think. Nobody thinks. Now, sure, if they just want an excuse to put that in okay, I don't really care about either team, but I'll root for the American team because I'm American. Okay, great, I can get that, but it's just that normal, and yet that's kind of the way that they think, and I get that's kind of why we don't see as many Canadian teams on their network as we should.
It's the Battle of Alberta I don't get, because even if you're not tuned into what's going on in hockey in general, and granted it was so highly publicized, it's kind of hard not to have seen what was going on, even if you're a casual fan, because it was plastered in a lot of places that you may read things on. You would almost think that because Edmonton has McDavid and Draisaitl, each of whom are putting up almost 1.5 points a game, that in itself would be a compelling team to watch.
Yes.
And then you factor in the rivalry with Calgary that stems back, and you can highlight the Wayne Gretzky, Joe Nieuwendyk, Theo Fleury days, and Hakan Lube and Joel Otto and Curry and all those guys. You can basically go from back to forward and forward to back when you market it, because of the matchups that existed then and how good they were. And now you have two teams that clearly have rebuilt that quote-unquote hatred for one another, as seen by the fight that exists between Kassian and Tkachuk and the comments that were made afterwards. And then you had Tkachuk playing on a line with, I think, Draisaitl in the All-Star game.
And they talked about it.
And they talked about it, right? So it was all over the place. And you knew that the first battle, you're probably going to see a fight between Tkachuk and Kassian. And you saw Kassian's remarks afterwards that he gave a stick tap to Tkachuk for fighting him, even though he may not have wanted to, but recognized that it was necessary. Given the situation, they'd almost think that, wow, we have all of this backstory going on. We have no idea what we're going to see, but the likelihood is somewhere, somehow, there's going to be something that happens in this game that people are going to be talking about. Hey, let's not air it on public TV.
I'm telling you, it's one of the things I don't get.
It's like the advanced marketing 101 that exists at times with the NHL.
There's no words. All right, so first couple of games back, Rangers beat Detroit. What's up, we'll be on air again next week. Between now and next week, what's the schedule? What's coming up for the Rangers?
4 home games. I think it's Toronto, Dallas, LA are 3 of the 4. I'll remember the 4th in a minute, but it's 4 straight home games at MSG. We know the Rangers have a pretty heavy schedule post All-Star break. I think it's 34 games in 65 days. Part of the reason why the 3-goalie situation might work a little bit. Henrik Lundqvist got his first shutout since 2017 on Saturday. He was brilliant. The only reason why they won that game was Lundqvist. He actually gets to start again tonight at home. So he is going back-to-back, which is interesting, but he deserves it based upon the shutout. The key question, though, Chris Kreider got hit by friendly fire on Saturday night. Mika Zibanejad was kind of trying to go around him. Kreider was down, and he kneed Kreider in the head. So clearly the concerns about a concussion exist. Nothing's been reported yet, but he's day-to-day. It's feasible, A, given the trade situation with Kreider being a UFA after the season and the need to be careful, and B, as we've seen before, and I wrote in my couple blogs and I'm writing in my article this week for RotoWire, is we all know concussion symptoms don't necessarily promulgate themselves immediately, right? You sort of see them afterwards sometimes. So they may be erring on the side of caution and may not play him tonight. But if the Rangers are going to get back into contention and they still have several teams to jump, but 2 games in hand and 9 points back to be in the wild card, then these 4 games at home will tell the tale. If you get bombed in those 4 games or don't make hay in those 4 games, then the likelihood of them moving some of the players we've talked about last week becomes a lot more obvious.
All right, Vancouver, so far in their 5-game road trip, they get 2 wins. Then they get the shutout loss yesterday to Carolina. So they would definitely take those first 3 games. 5 points so far. They are going to be in Boston tomorrow night. So that'll be a big matchup for them. And then they come back, take on Minnesota before heading back home. I believe their first game back home is against Calgary. So that's a good game to kick off a short homestand. But the shootout last night is just another thing for me to get out there. Everybody I talk to, everybody I hear is so sick of the shootout. I don't know anybody that likes it anymore. So it needs to change. They got to, in my opinion, extend 3-on-3 because you can go deeper in your bench. Look, bottom line, you don't want to kill your players because you're going to go an extra 3 or 4 or 5 minutes. Well, you got to play other players. You can't just play your, 6 or 7 guys. And if you do that, then you don't have the excuse of wear and tear on the players.
Rational view, I don't think that coaches like going 3 lines deep in the extra session. You can, though, right? Because if it's 2 forwards and a defenseman, right? You can hopefully have 3 or 4 defensemen you can kind of rotate. You're not going to go 3 forwards because you don't want to get shorthanded if you have to play defense. But there is a potential solution. Look, there's been a lot of discussion that's talked about, the points for a win, 2.23-2-1 scoring. So whatever solution needs to become, the shootouts were a nice gimmick beforehand. But as we talked about a couple times, it's a skills comp. Yeah. That's what it's become to decide a game, which was probably exciting years ago when it first broke in because it was new, fresh, and different. But now it's got kind of stale. Though you still see some great moves and some unbelievable stick handling and goaltending. I just don't know necessarily if that's the right way. But there is, one thing they do use is the regulation and overtime wins have a bit more weight than a shootout win because a tiebreaker is regulation overtime win. So there is something NHL did do at least a little bit to try to balance it out. Though I'm not sure that's fully working either. As you kind of mentioned, that it's, as we said, it's become a bit stale and a bit old, and even though it's exciting to watch, it's not necessarily the way you always want to decide a game, especially if you're on the losing half of the equation.
Last week we talked about Kreider and the Rangers and the possibility of trading him. This week, we got 2 minutes left before we let you go. I want to talk about Tyler Toffoli because he's the one guy that if I'm Jim Benning, I am going to do everything in my power to get Tyler Toffoli. I think he would be a perfect piece on this team. You put him back with Pearson. The 2 guys that were rookies when they went to and won the Stanley Cup with Carter on that line, you reunite those guys. So if I'm trying to get to Foley, and I'm also thinking this could be the team because they want to rebuild. So I'm going to go, okay, maybe this is the team where I can load Eriksson on. So let's start there. If LA is going to accept Eriksson, because their contracts are pretty similar, by the way. So if they're going to accept Eriksson in a role where they look at him as a mentor and we'll take him, what would the Kings need from Vancouver in order to do that? And also separate the fact that I think the rumors are the Kings are probably going to get something like a 2nd-round draft pick and a really good prospect for Toffoli since he's a free agent. So let's start there. Let's say that Vancouver's got to trade Eriksson, a 2nd-round pick, and maybe 2 prospects to get Toffoli?
Well, here's my question. What's the term left on Eriksson again?
He's got 2 more years after this.
Right.
But they're not. They're about $4 million.
Okay. So if you're going to move a contract to move Eriksson, if the original cost is a 2nd and a prospect, you're probably bumping it up to a 1st to try to move Eriksson in the 2 years to get the cap hit off your books because Toffoli basically expires at the end of the year. Right, so you kind of have to worry about that factor. So you got to bump up the equation to move salary, and then B, you're not going. I like Colin, but he's not a great prospect, and he hasn't had a great year. I know Wu is another guy.
What about Demko?
Demko, no, because you need to have the backup to Markstrom.
Yeah, but what if they re-sign Markstrom before the trade him?
They also got Jonathan Quick, and I don't think LA is going to be able to move Jonathan Quick.
No,
so they got the dead cap.
Yeah, but they could trade. They can get Campbell. Just bring Vancouver Campbell.
Look, if you're going to give up Demko, that's fine. Demko would have a weight. You're not giving up Holander. You're not giving up Colson. Those are way too
No,
high.
no.
I would see maybe a guy like Tyler Madden. And Madden is a guy who I think some people like better than others, but he would be an intriguing enough prospect to maybe make LA think more. And especially if you bump up that second to a first or maybe 2-2s to try to move Erickson's contract, that might be sufficient enough to get to Foley, though. There's probably going to be maybe 6 to 8 teams that are in on trying to get him.
And bottom line is, if it's not Erickson, it's a lot easier of a deal.
Yeah, but you're still giving up quality to get him.
And I got no problem. I got no problem giving up a good prospect. And again, not the top ones we talked about, but you give up a Lind and a second-round draft pick. And maybe if you have to give up something else, especially maybe a Sven Berchi, because you have to give them some money. You have to give them some money. Vancouver doesn't have the cap space.
Right.
I mean, I think it's
But
manageable.
LA can eat half the salary this year also, so that eases the burden a bit.
That's true. Okay. Anyway, I think that's the one player that Vancouver can bring on, and I think he would make a load of difference. Any other names I've heard, I just don't think it makes sense, and I don't think it's going to be a game changer. All right, so we'll wrap it up here, Jan. We'll talk more about futures next week. We'll post up your futures picks up on the site a little bit later on. And thanks a lot for tuning in and checking in with us again. We'll talk to you next week.
Sounds good.